From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Hello and welcome to Chicago Newsroom. I'm Lee Bay, filling in for the vacationing Ken Davis. The famous Picasso sculpture in Daley Plaza turns 50 this year. The work brought more international fame to Chicago, of course, but it also kicked off a wave of Chicago public art that has given us a half-century of quality work, including the Bean at Millennium Park and even a new Yoko Ono piece in Jackson Park. This year, the city is celebrating its 50-year legacy of public art since the Picasso with a series of events called the Year of Public Art, 50 by 50. And it's also shining light on Wall of Respect, a Southside mural created by black artists in 1967, the same year as the Picasso, that is in many ways just as influential. Joining me now to talk about public art is Erin Harkey from the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. She's in charge of the Year of Public Art activities. And we're also joined by artist Jon Pounds, Executive Director Emeritus of the Chicago Public Art Group, a nonprofit with roots that go back to the Wall of Respect mural. Erin and Jon, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning.
So I want to start here with you, Erin. You're new to Chicago, right, by way of LA?
I am new to Chicago by way of LA. I've been here since August.
So this is your first Chicago winter, which isn't really a Chicago
No,
winter.
it's not that bad.
This is how they get you here. This is how they get you here. They give you a few soft winters.
Soft winters, and then
they get you. I've been here 51 years. That's how they got me here. It was warm at the beginning, and now
I'm surprised. Not too bad.
Good, good. And Jon, again, thanks for joining us. You know, we're going to jump right into the and go back in time a bit to 1967, before you were born, obviously, but before you were here. But the Picasso sculpture in Daley Plaza, this was quite a thing when it opened, when it was unveiled back then.
Yeah, I think it was. People didn't really know quite what to make of it, and I think public art up until that time had been largely, figurative, commemorative work. So this was a new idea entirely, and so I think people, had some questions about it. But I think it's a real testament to public art that it has become such a, monumental and important symbol for the city as a whole.
And interesting that it kicked off this sort of generation or two of public art. You get in pretty short order. You got Calder's Flamingo.
Yes, which is beautiful. One of my favorites.
Restored recently to its original color. It looks beautiful. So what happened? I mean, what's going on what did we touch off in 1967 with public art?
Well, I think it falls in line a lot with art in public places programs throughout the city. So we see a lot of monumental sculpture coming into public plazas. And also, I think the connection between government and the commissioning of public art. So in 1978, the city of Chicago started our own public art ordinance, and at the time it was sort of a new thing, and actually was a model for other cities who were also looking at, this government-sponsored public art. So there's a lot of things sort of happening around that time, around government commissioning, around private commissioning of public artworks in public spaces.
And Jon, we're going to bring you in a second, but Erin, talk a little bit about why is this good for the city? You got art in public places. What does this do for the life and the experience of a city?
Well, I think, what it does is sort of, for me, public art brings people together, but it also, in the midst of our day-to-day lives, sort of gives us a moment to escape. I think it gives an identity to place. It provides a point of destination and a landmark, places where people can gather together. So all of that is, I think, really just about providing identity and giving moments and spaces for people to connect with one another.
Now, Jon, while the Picasso was being unveiled, to a little shock and a little awe back then, and that, as I recall, people even thought, well, what is it, and should it be a statue of Ernie Banks instead?
Yeah.
On the south side, about 40 blocks south of there was something else happening that same year, 67, with Wall of Respect. Talk a little bit about that.
I think it's astonishing that it happened just 4.5 miles away from, and the same month of the same year, that a group of African American artists came together and collaborated on creating a piece which was unheard of at that time. Not that murals had never been painted, that had been done. But this was not a commissioned mural. It also involved visual artists collaborating, which pretty much was never done before then. It also involved men and women collaborating, which was really never done at that time. It also involved musicians and poets and writers and photographers contributing to and creating a scene at that site, which could be called a happening or a social awareness thing, but it was a collaboration across all the disciplines at a site that was not prepared to be, it was not created as a public art site. It was a street corner where the artist had permission to make something happen. And they made the Wall of Respect a tribute to African American culture, a really lively place that was also then a model for other kinds of artists to collaborate and to synthesize, sometimes to argue and to differ, but certainly to create a form which had a lot of animation in it.
Now talk a little bit about where it was. And it was on Champlain on the side of a building.
43rd and Langley, actually.
Langley,
yeah, 43rd and Langley. Fairly nondescript building. Some of the windows had been boarded over. It was actually an active building, but not a very active building. It was simply a building where William Walker knew someone and could get permission to do the painting. So it was done with permission, but it was not done as a commissioned piece. I'm not sure that there was ever any money in particular involved. It was simply the artist decided, we have an important message that we need to provide for our community because we don't like the way we see African American culture presented in the dominant media. We want to create and present an alternative history, an alternative vision, and that's what it became.
You know, it's really fascinating to look at them as a pair because you have these kind of two things happening at the same time. You have Richard J. Daley, Old Man Daley, wanting to remake downtown, right? To sort of throw away the past, which had been unkind, the recent past, and even the present, which had been unkind to Chicago, unkind to downtown, and kind of remake it into this modern city. Picasso begins to exemplify that, and then you have this almost similar movement happening there on the south side with Wall of Respect.
I think they're really important anchors to a conversation about public art in Chicago. I think those are two things that Chicago artists and communities do really well. We do monumental sculpture really, really well. And we also have I think a tremendous sense of and spirit of activism and community participation. So having those two, I think, artworks anchor this discussion about public art this year is really important and very special and I think unique to Chicago.
And in a few minutes we're going to get into exactly how you're going to be celebrating this, which is a lot of great stuff happening in every ward. We'll bring that up in a few minutes. To get back to the Wall of Respect, tell us a little bit about the figures, and we'll talk about the fate of the wall as well. But talk about the images that were there, which again would seem commonplace now, but would be revolutionary in '67, just as the Picasso was.
Sure, I think one of the polemics that was involved at that time is something that we've wrestled with not only before that, but continue today, which is the difference between the formal structure of something, the formal elements of it, and the way in which it's made, which has often led to modernist abstraction, and the storytelling component that is also an art in a variety of forms. And so what happened with this was that the story that needed to be told, because they felt like it was not told, was based on what they knew of African American culture, because they lived in it. They were people they knew. They were exactly the people that they lived with as well. And so what was created was this sort of dichotomous moment. The Picasso was unveiled and there was silence. I was actually old enough to be vaguely sort of conscious of what was going on at the time. I was alive, but not entirely alive. But I understood that there was just this vast silence of like, what?
Yeah.
And at the other site, there was this unfolding over time because it was a public performance as it was going on. There was no unveiling of it, but it was this constant shifting change of artists trying to figure out how to create a work which was compelling and storytelling and a shared responsibility, and to take their storytelling and narrative capacity into a very public form. So these two pieces were quite extraordinary for happening just miles apart at the same moment.
And with the wall, you have various African American figures of the day and of the past, and it changes over time. Am I right?
It does change over a period of about 3 years. It gets painted and overpainted. That was some of the dissension, was the decision making about how to overpaint or when to overpaint something. There were no real good models for how to make those kinds of decisions, and decisions were made without the resolution that comes with ego, and artists have ego. And that sometimes came into play. But it really was the dialogue that was created about what does it mean to create meaning in this setting? What is the message? So there were messages there that represented history or contemporary racist experiences that people had, the very real racism and divisions of that time, as well as the very heroic and strong men and women who created life that was really a beckoning to all of us to live better lives.
You know, revolutionary at the time. You know, if life before Picasso in public art was essentially guys on horseback, heroic, you know, with the flag in their hand, the standard in their hand, and then after Picasso, you get this really progressive and very cool contemporary and modern work. With the Wall of Respect, life before that, mural-wise, as you mentioned, there were murals before, but they were non-political largely, right? I mean, they were just sort of beautiful things.
Largely, the WPA did commission some things which had some politics and some problematic politics in some of them, but they were basically storytelling pieces in every form. They were beautiful stories, quite often, that would recognize that there were complexities in some cases, but they were largely historical pieces, telling historical moments.
And both pieces kick off not only a movement here in Chicago, but really sort of nationally and internationally. Certainly the murals change in LA from where you're from. The idea of murals change after that, and public art does too. Talk a little bit about the ripples that spread nationally, maybe even internationally, if you know, from these two works.
Well, I think the community mural movement is just a really important point in a lot of different communities. I tell the story a lot of when I came to Chicago and I went on a tour with Jon, and he took us on a tour of the murals in Hyde Park and Bronzeville that were, you know, 1968, you know, early 1970s, and they were, you know, just as vibrant and just as important as I think the day that they were made. So I think that tradition of reflecting community, also using murals to sort of inspire community participation, reflect community identity, is a really important, I think, moment in sort of the history of public art, and you see that in communities throughout the country. In LA, where I'm from, there's a large Chicano mural movement that sort of reflects that same idea. So I think it can be pointed to in many different communities in many different ways, but I think the Wall of Respect was really, I think, important in giving communities and artists, you know, permission to sort of do that and take that on in their own and self-initiate that work.
You know, and let's talk a little bit about what happens to, well, before we get to that, before we talk about what happens to the Wall of Respect, let's give some props to the people who were, to the artist, Bill Walker, of course, and others who created this. What can you tell us about them and who they were?
They were, many of them, students at the University of Chicago. Some of them were at the School of the Art Institute. Some of them had studied art other places, but they were people who had gone into studying art. So they were not just home artists. They were people who had significant skills and critical eyes and the ability to be articulate about what they thought was important. In that sense, then, many of them came from out of Chicago because they were here studying. Only a few of them remained in Chicago and had a longer experience here. Eugene Ida, who was taught here for a long time, worked on the wall. His work is now at the Cultural Center as a beautiful exhibition.
Yes.
That particular sense that there was a groundedness of some people who remained here in the neighborhood, as Bill Walker did, who was a longtime South Sider and never famous or wealthy in any way, except he continued to produce work in neighborhood settings that was done with students sometimes and sometimes on his own, but very deep and compelling work. So there was a way in which some of the artists, like the problem is you want to be famous, right? Everybody sort of wants that in some sense. And yet there is also the aspect of humility, which says, I need to work in a place where this meaningful work, where I can do meaningful work for other people. And that's a little different than humility, but it's a component of a commitment to a space or an idea or a politic that was just as profound as all of the artists who were doing large-scale, site-specific works through a different process.
Now, you knew Bill Walker very well. In fact,
I did.
you know, you and I have conversations about him. Talk about a little bit of his impact And we lost a Bill Walker mural. We know some were saved
Yep.
through Public Art,
Yep.
Chicago Public Art Group
Yep.
and other places,
Yep.
but we lost one recently. That's really
We lost.
a shame.
It was a shame to lose. It was been painted over. It was in the former Cabrini Green neighborhood on the front of a church. All of Mankind was a profound piece, which we are still deals with ideas that we are still wrestling with, about how it is that mankind can do such inhuman things to each other across race, but sometimes with a very great racial awareness, but out of a variety of senses of empowerment and entitlement, that we have done horrible things. And yet that same piece, All of Mankind, calls on all of us to be spiritual leaders, spiritual participants in the search for meaning and to create a more human, more just world. It was a powerful piece, but Bill did that kind of work, that he did work, a piece that he has on 56th and Stony, which is this astonishing linking of 4 figures that share a total of 5 eyes. And yet when it was done in '74, he knew to create all of the races of the world and 2 men and 2 women, and to have them shared this sort of genetic realm, this embodiment of a single character that was all of humanity. And that was like never thought of in 1974 that way. We were very much into a time of separatism and prideful separatism. But he was really in a different strain in that moment of just seeing us as human beings in a constant and similar struggle with each other. Not the same struggle, but that had components that were similar.
That really is a great work.
It is.
It really is. By the metro tracks, and
Yep.
the faces kind of link almost like Venn diagrams, but they share these kind of. Have you get a chance to see it?
I haven't actually,
It's
but I
worth
think
checking out.
it reminds me just, I think, of the important, we tend to talk about the artwork itself, what manifests, but the important role that artists play in our communities and really focusing on, sort of how to support artists more generally than sort of looking at and analyzing the final work, but more about how do we provide more resources for artists to be the sort of connective tissue and change makers that Bill was.
Well, let's get to what the city's doing, and hopefully some of that will come out of this.
Sure.
This is really a big thing. I mean, that the city is doing to celebrate this. It's kind of pulling out all stops in some respects. There's a exhibition at the Cultural Center,
Yes.
but there are other things happening too. Talk about that.
There are a number of exhibitions at the Cultural Center. You mentioned the Eugene Ida doors.
Let's talk about that.
Yes,
Let's
they're gorgeous.
And just by way of background, before I get, these were doors that were inside the old Malcolm X College on Jackson Street that was demolished. Beautiful modernist building. I hated to see it go. It was filled with African-inspired art and murals and things that was part of the educational experience there of this university, this college that opened, community college that opened in '71. Most of it was lost in terms of the murals in the building, but the doors were saved. Now talk about where you can see them.
So the doors were saved, but they were in storage for many years. So this is our way to sort of resurrect them and bring them to the public's attention. But you can see them. They're in the Yates Gallery. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're 32 doors. They're monumental in size, and I have to say that the visual arts team did a fantastic job in terms of the installation and finding out a solution. To how to install the doors so you can actually move around them and sort of get the full experience. But they really covers a range of sort of image and symbolism that you would find from sort of the Black art movement in terms of Egyptian symbolism to figurative. So they're gorgeous, and I really encourage everybody, if they have not already, to come down to the Cultural Center and check them out.
Really fantastic. I mean, these are the doors that would lead up the stairways. These are so the doors that you would, push the bar and open up. And it could be something you'd pass by without even thinking. But they had the thought then to make these doors gateways, portals, in a way, using this art. Talk a little bit more about, but in talking about this exhibit and showing the exhibit, you also give a bit of the history as you walk into the exhibit of the college itself, of Malcolm X College itself, too.
Yeah, so it really does try to, I think, root the exhibition within the larger framework of the Black Arts Movement and Malcolm X College, and sort of the important moment that those two things played in the history of Chicago. So there's a lot of historical context that comes along with the exhibition. In addition to the beaded doors. We are going to be doing a show on the Wall of Respect that's curated by Romy Crawford. So there's a number of sort of historical exhibits related to public art that will be at the Chicago Cultural Center, opening on February 25th.
Excellent. And there's also one in the first floor.
Yes.
That talks about public art. Talk about that.
Yeah, so it's curated by Tim Samuelson, who is our resident cultural historian. Yes. And a national treasure, as far as I'm concerned.
Same.
So it's called The Pride and Perils of Public Art, but it's sort of a, if you know Tim, it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek look at sort of a timeline, an alternative timeline, if you will, that looks at, sort of the stickier things about public art. Public art is not all glory. It's difficult and challenging some of the time. So he's picked out a few of his favorites. Things to highlight, so all the way, I think, leading contemporarily to the sort of ends with the Wabash Arts Corridor. So there are some contemporary references, but it's definitely worth a look, and he's done a great job in transforming that first floor space.
Indeed. I mean, there's even a bit on the Taft sculpture in Washington Park, Fountain of Time. That's a real beauty, a concrete beauty that was restored about 15 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
But so there's that. Tell me what's happening over this. You're not just keeping this in downtown. You're spreading the wealth throughout all 50 wards.
Yeah, Mayor Emanuel was really quite adamant that we find a way to get this in as many places as possible and reach as many neighborhoods as possible, which is why we've taken the 50-year anniversary of the Wall of Respect and the Picasso and times it by 50, which is alluding to all 50 wards. So we're doing pairing up with aldermen. They're going to be contributing a portion of their menu funds, and DCASE is going to be matching those funds to complete new public art projects in all 50 wards. So the application is open right now, and artists are currently applying to be qualified for that opportunity. So that's really fantastic. It's really ambitious, but we are, I think, really excited about the opportunity to get the conversation about public art, outside of downtown, and start to have more neighborhood conversations that are, I think, akin to what the Wall of Respect was all about.
Jon?
I love what she's saying. I'll only extend it a little bit by saying I think that we have seen public art slowly become, and continues to become, but a more vital form in terms of our civic community dialogue. If at first it was largely based on people arguing in a room or arguing on a street corner about what should be done, that it's actually become a place where people now talk about what might be done, what should be done, how it will be done, what it will mean, and it becomes the extension from both of those roots. It becomes the extension of us having a larger civic dialogue about what sort of a culture do we want to create to live in. Yeah. And public art's a very significant form of that because it's kind of neutral. It's maybe more interesting than talking about fresh water, which is also really important, but it actually has a complexity to it that I think is attractive.
Yeah, and I think we were actually just at a meeting yesterday, which is why I was happy and surprised to see him today. But along with this is the conversations I think that we've started to have about better ways to support artists, better ways to support public art. We are a government agency, but I think we recognize the importance of also providing space for artists and communities to self-initiate and to develop their own projects, that it just can't be a top-down approach to commissioning work, but really about supporting a broader ecology that supports and provides resources for communities doing this work on their own behalf.
We've got a minute or two left. Time goes by so fast. We're having fun. Tell us a bit about what that might look like going forward, and where you hope this. I mean, you're giving me a sense of that now. Where the two of you want this. Where does this go? 50 years, 50 wards. It ends the end of the year. What happens next?
Well, I think there are a lot of policy and planning implications for the work. We're working on a public art plan now that has some recommendations for policy and also how we increase sort of resources more generally and get more resources in the hands of artists and communities, and also provide toolkits, and incentives that will help support this work long term. So it is the year of public art, but every year, as far as we are concerned, we should be focusing on these issues.
And Jon, more murals, I take it, but also we got to save the ones we've got. We don't want to lose another William Walker.
Yeah, there are some really significant ones that should be saved. And in fact, there's a conservation conference at the end of May this year that's going to talk about the ways in which artists and conservators and community members will wrestle with the ideas of should we preserve a piece which was done 30 or 50 years ago, and is it ever permissible to change the piece which was done because our understanding has changed of the ideas that are presented. So it's very dialogical, and I think that one of the things that we can see in this city is that we have schools, we have underpasses, we have parks, we have all sorts of sites which are public sites, and that they are all potentially there for our civic dialogue about where do we want to live, what values do we want to express, what do we want to resist, or what do we want to resist being in some cases. How do we say this is our world and we are shaping it artistically?
We've got about a minute left, so let's play favorites. And I know you're new, so this is kind of an unfair question. But so far, from what you've seen so far, if there's one piece of public art that you have to tell someone, go see right now, what might it be?
Well, Millennium Park is easy, but I will send people to Millennium Park for Crown Fountain specifically.
But not the Bean.
The Bean Cloudgate is wonderful, but I think in the summertime when I see kids playing in that fountain and interacting with the artwork, there's just something super special about that. So on the weather, it is currently under restoration right now, but it will be open back in the spring. So I encourage everybody to take a dip in the fountain.
Excellent, excellent, Jon.
That's a tough one for me, but I'm going to go to what came first to mind, which is 56th and Lake Park, 56th and Stony, because on those two walls there that share the same underpass, there's a piece by Olivia Goody, who I know well. She's my wife, but it's a very compelling piece called Where We Come From, Where We're Going, and it's a look at people's lives and addressing how they're changing and shifting in their lives, combined with, on the other end, Bill Walker's piece, which I spoke of a little bit ago. I think that those two pieces from a historic perspective that still have very contemporary values that can teach us a lot today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think we'll have to leave our discussion there for now. Thank you very much for joining me. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom, a community service of CAN TV. Of course, you can find us here on cable, but you can also see this on the programs on our website, cantv.org. I'm Lee Bay. Thanks again to Jon and Erin for joining us, and thank you.